Good morning. As we have been opening up the book of James, James has defined for us that a wise person is someone who is patterning their life after God's wisdom. In fact, he says the person who does that is actually living the good life. And the good life is defined not so much by positions, promotions, prosperity, or praise. The good life is actually defined, according to James, by deeds done in humility that is couched in the wisdom of God. And the wisdom of God is defined as that which is pure and peace-loving, that is considerate and submissive, full of mercy, good fruit, impartial, sincere. In fact, when you take a closer look at that definition of wisdom, what you discover is that the deeds done in humility has very little to do with us and a whole lot to do with others. John Dickson is the author of a book called Humilitas, a lost key to life, love, and leadership. And in his book, he states that humility actually starts from a position of strength. It starts with a sense of personal dignity, a healthy sense of our own self-worth and abilities before God. Unlike humiliation, which can be thrust upon us by others, humility is a choice that we make willingly. And not only is humility something that comes from a position of strength and that we make willingly, but humility, it says, is also social. He says it's how we learn to treat others more than how we think about ourselves. And so in his book, John Dickson illustrates the beauty of humility in the life of Sir Edmund Hillary. Back in 1953, Sir Edmund Hillary and a Sherpa guide, which was also a good friend of his, Tenzin Norgay, it says that they achieved, as the first ascenders in May of 1953, ascending to the top of Mount Everest. And what they achieved stands as one of modern times truly great physical feats. In fact, Mount Everest stands at 29,029 feet. And when you consider that commercial jets cruise at around 30,000, it is the highest altitude of any mountain in the world. Now, Hillary was duly honored because of his accomplishment. Listen to some of the credits that he got. It says in the same year he was knighted. In 1985, he was made New Zealand's highest commissioner to India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. In 95, he received British realm's highest award, the Order of the Gaiter, membership of which is limited to 24 individuals. However, more important to Hillary were the efforts that he gave to give back to the Nepalese something of what they had given him. Beginning a Himalayan trust back in the 60s, he spent his life and he built hospitals and airfields and schools. And those who knew him well said that he always maintained a humble outlook and a readiness to serve others throughout his life. One story that's captured by Dickson in his book kind of captures this side of this profound humility in Sir Edmund Hillary. It says that he was on one of his many trips back to the Himalayas where he was spotted by a group of tourist climbers. They begged him for a photo, and so Sir Edmund agreed. And they handed him an ice pick so that he could look the part and set up for the photograph. Well, just then another climber passed the group and, not recognizing the man at the center, strode up to Hillary and said, "Excuse me, sir, but you're not holding the ice pick correctly. Here, let me show you." Everyone just stood around in amazed silence as Hillary thanked the man, let him adjust the pick, and happily went on with the photograph. It doesn't matter how experienced the other climber was. His greatness was diminished by this intrusive presumption. You see, what happened is we get repelled by this sense of pride, don't we? But when you hear the story of Sir Edmund Hillary, his greatness is somehow enhanced because of it. Listen, if we're not diligent in this regard, our life can become so burdened by an earthly, unspiritual wisdom that it leads us in directions that really are never going to be helpful. And the truth of the matter is that in our life, this shift is so subtle that we're often unaware of it until our lives begin to bear the marks of this disorder. Life has a way of becoming this increasing chore, and our hearts sometimes will begin to grow callous, and it's as if we're stumbling around in the dark, unaware of what it is that is making us stumble. All we know is that life doesn't seem to really be working. And try as we will in coming up with all kinds of solutions, it only seems to exacerbate the problems. So what is the cause for the dissension? Why so much discord, strife? Why is there so much hatred and anger? What causes the conflicts among us? That is a question that James is going to address for us today as we look at James chapter 4. And as we do so, I want us to then, in answering this question, I want us to think about this. What is the origin of our conflicts? What is the origin of our conflicts? Let's begin by reading James 4. It says, "What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You want something but don't get it. You kill and covet, but you cannot have what you want. You quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask. And when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world is hatred toward God? Anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. Or do you think Scripture says, without reason, that the Spirit He caused to live in us envies intensely? But He gives us more grace. That is why Scripture says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble." Now, I want you to take another look at this text. And as we do so, I want you to fill in the blanks as you find them in your sermon notes. And the purpose for this is I want you to become keenly aware of what is at the origin of the conflicts that lie within. For James, he says, it's your desires that are battling within you. You see that word desire? That word desire is really, could be translated pleasures. Because it comes from what we will translate into English as hedonism. That's the word there. It speaks of this innate desire, a desire for pleasure, a desire to make life work and to make it easy for us, which in itself is not a bad thing. But if that sole desire becomes consuming, there is this battle within us that is always trying to make things work out the way we want them to work out. Now, these desires that batter within you, the word there, you, is a plural. So it could speak of you, meaning all of us, or it could mean the whole community of people. And we see how that works, right? There are these battles that take place within us, and as they manifest themselves out in the fruit of the way in which we're living, it affects everybody around us. But notice what is at the heart of some of these battles. It says in verse 4:2, it says, you want something, but don't get it. You cannot have what you want. And so these desires then, they really find at the core that something is not being met. A desire is not being fulfilled. It's not being gratified. And as a result, there is this churning that takes place internally. And so sometimes then we might even be moved to pray. We're asking for something that we don't have. And what does he say here in verse 3? He says, you ask with wrong motives. that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. And as a result of that, you could see why then James calls them an adulterous people. They're adulterers because they're following after two loves, the love of God and the love of the world, which he says here is friendship with the world. And as you looked at the text before us, it says, don't you know that friendship with the world will have, an ill effect on you and on your relationship with God? So just taking a look at the text then, you begin to recognize that maybe what is going on inside of us, maybe this unrest, this sense of dissatisfaction, has everything to do with what is at the core that is driving us. And very often when that focus is on us, it's upon our pleasures, right? Our gratification, what we want. And we're always trying to fulfill that. And very often we'll use ways that are contrary to the very way that God has already disclosed in what he considers to be this wise life, this godly life, this good life. And so what's at the fruit then of this? The fruit of the conflicts then we see in our text. It says, first of all, that there are these fights and quarrels. You look down in verse 2, and it says there's fights and quarrels, and consequently there are these quarrels and fights. You just look at the text before you, and you could just fill them in. Again, it says the fruit that comes from a life that is focused on my desires, my will, my pleasures, it says it not only leads to the fights and quarrels, but it says you wind up killing and coveting. I read that text and immediately I thought of Cain and Abel. Wasn't that really at the heart of what was taking place within them? Cain was seeking approval in his own way, was jealous of his own brother, didn't get what he thought was owed to him, and he lashes out by taking his own brother's life. And that story is repeated over and over and over again as you just live out your days, right? You read about it in papers, you listen to it on the news, we experience it sometimes even in our families. Now, I think when you read this text of killing and coveting, it probably is best to understand this as hyperbole. It's not that people maybe were going out and actually killing people, although there are evidences of that around us. But for the most part, people, they don't get their own way. They're not immediately going to try and kill somebody. But I just want to bring to your attention again maybe what might be behind James's words. Because James was very familiar, right, with his brother Jesus and his teachings. I want to recall to you what it says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 21 and 22. There, Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not murder.' And anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Anyone who says to his brother, 'Raka,' is answerable to the Sanhedrin. Anyone who says, 'You fool,' will be in danger of the fire of hell." You see how we treat one another, the words we use to express that, disdain. It says, it's as if you murder someone. Jesus takes this concept and then raises it up and causes us all to look within and recognize how difficult this really is. This call of God on our life, which all the more requires that we walk hand in hand with the Spirit so that He begins to transform us and we become more and more conformed into His image. But if the origin has everything to do with these deep-seated desires on our part that are not being met, and we're trying all which ways to meet them, then you could see not only does it lead to these fights and quarrels, not only is there this tendency to kill and covet, but in verse 4 it says it leads towards hatred towards God. And in that hatred towards God, we see that we become an enemy of God in verse 4. So our hatred towards God, by becoming friends with the world, makes us this enemy of God. And ultimately, when you go down to verse 6, we're going to read here that God says he opposes the proud. And so those who are seeking to advance themselves, those who have their own misplaced zeal, those who are filled with perhaps a selfish ambition that's all about them, without really bringing into any kind of reflection on their life and on the ways in which we're living, the wisdom of God that James has been trying to promote throughout this whole book. We're keeping God's ways at a distance. We're saying, thank you very much, but I'm the one that's driving the car here. I want to do it the way I want to do it. And the fruit of that, as you see now listed before you, is all kinds of disorder. There's all kinds of unrest. It places us in a bad position with the very one who wants to bless us. And so it is not a good thing. And that's what makes life so filled with turmoil and stress. And the more and more we experience that, it has a detrimental effect on the way in which we look out at the world, or then we even look at ourselves. We get a poor self-image. We look out at the world around us and we become cynical. And suddenly now our lack of patience and tolerance is frayed, and it just expresses itself in disdain and strife and all kinds of jealousies. You could see why, again, this nature, instead of being transformed into something that God wants to create by virtue of his Spirit living in us, now we're just feeding into this baser nature that is just pulling us down and tearing us apart. And so James wants us to know, what is at the source of this? It's this great disconnect that we have with God. And it ought not to be that way, which is why he offers us a solution. Now, the solution that God offers is now going to be followed by a whole series of like commands that are unpacked here. And they all come from this text that you looked at just a few moments ago in James chapter 4, verse 6, where he quotes the proverb chapter 3, verse 34, where it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. You see, God's offer of grace is now being placed alongside his opposition to those who are prideful. And as a result of that, in the midst of a threat where God says, look, I oppose the proud, he says, but he gives us more grace. That is something that I think is worthy for us to just sit back and think a little bit more deeply about. Very often we hear the front part about what God is against, but God is actually for us. In the midst of a text that we're just looking at here, what do we find? But if he is opposed, as the text says, to the proud, but he also gives more grace to the humble. And so as a result of that, he's placing us in a position so that we would succeed, that we would experience, I think, this good life that he has and desires for us. So maybe you're here today and the things that I'm saying are just beginning to like ring true in your own mind and in your own heart. Maybe you're at this stage today where you're thinking, boy, you know what? I need to take a closer look at what it is that is driving my behaviors. What is behind this personal ambitions that I have? Is it everything about me? Is it about what I want, what I'm envisioning for me and for those around me? And then there's little regard to what God's ways are so that I manage my life in a way that pleases him? Or is God not even a part of that equation? He's not even part of that consideration. See, if that happens, then the wisdom that we are using to guide our lives is something that James already said is earthly, it's unspiritual, it's of the devil. It reflects the way the devil goes about his work. Always this sense of strife and hatred and jealousy and dissensions, all these things that take place, and the world is filled with that kind of fruit. Because at the heart of man, there is this rebellion against the things of God. But what God does in sending his son Jesus is seeking now to bring us to a place where we are reconciled to him, and as a result we are being transformed from the inside out. Our hearts have now been transplanted. This new faith that that he has given to us, has brought peace with God, and it ought to now trickle down so that we become peacemakers. And that's all that James is trying to offer to us. And so what he's going to do now, he's going to unpack what that looks like. The solution that God is offering to you and me is a solution that is based on these very next steps. So let me read them to you, and they're found in James 4, verses 7 through 10. He says, "Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, wail. Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up." You know, if you had to take that passage and define it by one word, it would be the word repentance. It would be a way in which we are bringing our lives and everything back into the alignment that fits with the wisdom of God. Because at the source of all this internal strife, and a strife that is seen, evidenced within our communities, is sometimes a misplaced ambition where it's all about us, instead of a good life being expressed by deeds done in humility that come from the wisdom of God. So let's look a little bit more then at this repentance. It begins by telling us that God is saying, look, if you submit yourself to God, this is what it will entail. It says it will entail that you resist the devil. And then what's the promise? You resist, God says the devil will flee. If the devil's not fleeing, isn't it reasonable then for you and I then to ask ourselves this question: how am I going about resisting? You see, if I am giving in to these temptations, if I am allowing, those boundaries to just kind of bleed over so that they are non-distinct anymore, if I find myself living my life without any kind of restraint whatsoever, not bridled in any way by God's wisdom that is trying to teach me to live in a way that's different from the world all around me, then my submission to God needs to be fueled by a resistance to the things that are contrary to God. And if that's not happening, then don't we see that I'm just feeding the flame? Those passions that are waging battles in me, how are they ever going to be tamed? How are they ever going to be brought into any kind of spiritual alignment? That is a very serious question for all of us to ask. When we find that somehow or another the devil is finding a way in me, that he has gotten a foothold in my life, can you just stop for a moment and ask yourself, am I really paying attention? Am I really seeing this the way God sees it? Am I resisting the devil? There are two passages that I've noted in your sermon notes, and they would be good for you to have some discussion at the, after the service, and perhaps during the week, that you could just look at another text. It's one of them is found in 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 8 and 9. It says this, it says, "Be self-controlled and alert. Your enemy, the devil is your enemy, It says the enemy, your devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that your brothers throughout the world are undergoing the same kinds of sufferings. It comes as no surprise. The devil, he's at odds with the wisdom of God. He's doing everything he can to create environments that would lead us astray. But internally, if our ambitions are not rightly aligned with the wisdom of God, internally this battle begins to take place, and the next thing you know, we're making decisions that we're going to live to regret. And some of those decisions will have detrimental effects on your career, on your parenting, on your marriages, on your relationships with people. It will place you in situations where one day you turn around and you won't believe how you actually descended to such a level. And you'll feel shame and regret. And the sting of that will not easily be shaken. Listen, the solution to quieting those battles inside begins with a submission to God. And that submission begins by a resisting of the evil one. And God is making a promise. He will flee from you. The other text here, as we saw in Ephesians chapter 6, where we are exhorted to be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. It says, put on the full armor of God so that you might be able to stand against the devil's schemes. And he says, because we don't fight against flesh and blood. We are fighting against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. You see, that's where the battle is. It's always internal. It's always this displaced, desire that is raging against the wisdom of God. We think we know better. God is constantly urging us through the Spirit of God that he's placed into us, saying, listen, set your affections on things above. It says, keep your eyes on me. Submit yourselves to the Lord. And then it says, and resist the devil, and he will flee. That's one side. The other side of that coin is it says, come near to God, and he will come near to you. So just as I asked you that question about what are you doing in your life now to resist the devil? What kind of disciplines are you bringing into your life? What are you doing to fill your mind with truth? God is now saying it's not just enough to resist the devil, because you could clean the whole house, but if internally you don't change, it's just going to be a mess again. That's why God comes and says, look, I want you to come near to me. And then the promise, I will come near to you. You resist the devil, he'll flee. You come to me, and I will draw near to you. So how do you do that? Well, today's a good start, right? We're all here. We're placing ourselves in a position to learn something from God and from his Spirit. But here's another thing then. How am I training this mind? Do I spend any time whatsoever in reading the Scriptures? Do you realize that reflection on the Bible is the number one catalyst that will bring us into a state of spiritual maturity? If you don't feed your soul, it's going to starve. And now you look at your life. Take out your calendars. Look at how you spend your days. We can't spend a moment in the course of a day, a few times in the course of a week, where you're actually thinking a little bit more deeply about the wisdom of God and how it could be a part of your life. If you want a solution to this raging battle that oftentimes fills our hearts and our minds, then it's going to come based on a submission to God that is seen in not only resisting the devil, but also drawing near to God in the exercise of essential, disciplines that are needed for us to grow. He goes on and talks a little bit more about what this repentance experience is going to look like. It talks about washing your hands, you sinners. Purifying your hearts, you double-minded. You know, you remember back in chapter 1 of James, it says that if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God. And God, who generously gives to all people, does so without finding fault. We talked about this already. God will never, castigate someone when they show a direction that they want to come near to him. He always is ready and willing. Why? Because while God opposes the proud, God gives grace to the humble. And so he's saying here, wash your hands, purify your hearts, because we're too double-minded. You know that word double-minded? It's the word that says, that is translated two-souled. It reminds me of this of people who really are not that committed to living this faithful life. On the one hand, they want the things that God is promising, but on the other hand, we're just not really willing to make the necessary sacrifices to see that come to fruition. And the text says here that for that to take place, our hearts need to be purified. We have to stop being this double-minded person. You know, when Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment was, and he said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul. The word soul is the same word that is translated here in double-minded, only it says two-souled. God wants you to be, not to be a two-souled person. He wants you to be a sold-out person. Sold out to him. My life now being reflective of God's wisdom and God's grace poured out into my life. Not chasing after perfection, but chasing after him. Chasing after a relationship that God says will make me whole. Now sometimes people stumble over this next verse here in verse 9. Where it says, grieve, mourn, wail, change your laughter to mourning, your joy to gloom. You read a text like that and you're thinking, what does he want me to do? Not enjoy this life? Am I supposed to walk around, with this sour look on my face, not really feeling the sense of joy, but always being despondent and in this state of deep repentance? Not at all. That's not the gospel that we receive from Jesus. Jesus came saying, I want you to have life and have it more abundant. The life that we experience in this life, when we chase after our own ambitions, when we have this desire for our own well-being, how good does that work out for you? We've already talked about numerous ways that our lives become more complicated, more entangled and entrenched in disciplines and in actions, habits that are hurtful. God, on the other hand, says, I want you to have life and I want you to have it to the full. We're also told in the scriptures that as a result of the salvation that we received in Jesus, it says that we have received a joy inexpressible and full of glory. That's not someone that looks like they have a sour-puss face everywhere they go. But what verse 9 is really saying to us is, what may have brought you pleasure when your eyes were on you, it says now when they're viewed through the lens of God's wisdom, we may recognize that what I thought was something really good, I now realize it was leading to my undoing. And that's why we weep. And that's why we grieve and mourn. Because the things that we would just laugh about, now we recognize they're no joking matter. They're destroying the good. If I have any hope of building a foundation to talk into my kid's life or my spouse's life, my friend's life, if I want to make any dent in a community that seems to be hell-bent, then I have to put on God's wisdom and I have to address the core of this issue. I have to love sincerely. I have to cling to what's good. I have to hate what's evil. I can't hate what God loves. I can't cling to what's evil. And my love can't be filled with hypocrisy. I have to be I have to love God with my whole soul. And so where does it bring us? It brings us to this place where we started. If God gives grace to the humble, God is saying, look, you humble yourself before the Lord and He will lift you up. Now, have you noticed how God reacts to us in this text? The text says, come near to me and I will come near to you. That James has just finished describing the source of the conflicts within us that is tearing us down. But God says, if you humble yourself before me, what does He say? I will lift you up. There's a great song titled Touch the Sky. I want you to listen to its piercing words. What fortune lies beyond the stars? Those dazzling heights too vast to climb. I got so high to fall so far, but I found heaven as love swept low. What treasure waits within your scars? This gift of freedom gold can't buy. I bought the world and sold my heart. You traded heaven to have me again. Find me here at your feet again. Everything I am, reaching out, I surrender. Come, sweep me up in your love again, and my soul will dance on the wings of forever. My heart beating, my soul breathing. I found my life when I laid it down. Upward falling, spirit soaring. I touched the sky when my knees hit the ground.